and welcome to Macros with Mythili, the ET-Now show that takes a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues and developments in India and overseas. Well, on the 1st of July 2018, it will be exactly a year since the country adopted the Goods and Services Tax (GST), the indirect tax regime that has been in the making for over a decade. So, in this edition of Macros with Mythili, we are going to take a hard look at the first year under what has been described as a watershed event, not only in the tax arena, but for the economy at large. And to help me do that, I am extremely privileged to have with me two experts who have been closely involved both in the design and the subsequent implementation of GST. Haseeb Drabu, who's worn many hats, including that of a journalist, until not so long ago was Finance Minister J&K, and who as member of the GST Council has had an inside view of how the Council goes about its very difficult task of finding consensus amongst 31 finance ministers representing 29 disparate states and the union territories of Delhi and Puducherry. I also have with me Najib Shah, a career revenue service official who as chairman Central Board of Excise and Customs oversaw all the preparatory work in the run-up to the implementation of GST before retiring in March 2017, just a few months before GST became a reality. Welcome to the show, Haseeb.
Thank you.
Najib. Let me start by asking both of you in turn. How would you describe as a watershed event, not only in the tax arena, but for the economy at large? Haseeb, agreed it can't be described either as a resounding success or as a complete failure, but if you were to rank it on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the best possible outcome and 1 the worst, where would you reckon the first year's experience stands and why? I'd like you to take into account not only how the taxes worked on the ground, but also the entire process of how decision making has evolved in the GST Council.
Well, in totality, if you look at it, not just simply as a administrative change in the tax regime, if you look at GST with the GST Council and the associated changes in starting from fiscal federalism to the impact it will have on the black economy and so on and so forth. Totality, I would, and also given the history that for not 10 years as you said, 14 years, finally getting to introduce GST, I would rate that 6 on 10. I would have liked to rate it higher. The only reason why I am putting it at 6 on 10 is because of the operational glitches that happened, and that in some ways impaired the speed of transmission of the GST issues down the line and compliance and other things, including revenue. But given the kind of change it made, the kind of deliberations, legal framework, compensation, federal finance issues, I'd certainly rate it nothing less than 6.
Najib, by someone who was very much part of the design of the GST, would you agree with Haseeb? Has the rollout experience been better or worse than you expected? Now that you've retired, you can tell us, what was your worst nightmare in the days before you demitted office?
Completely. In fact, I would rate it at 7 out of 10, simply because of the challenges which we had to face in the days leading to a taxation regime which will be across the country uniform, at rates uniform across the country. So yes, we were striving for a fiscal nirvana, and that was always going to be that much more difficult. Listen, all the objectives have largely been achieved. We did not want to have cascading of taxes. That has been eliminated. We wanted to reduce the time for movement of goods, improve the logistics. That has been achieved. We thought we should have a uniform tax across the country. That has been achieved. We thought we should not aim at having business decisions merely because of geographical benefits being given in some particular backward districts of the country. That has been achieved. Now, business decisions are taken simply because of other factors like the markets and the availability of raw materials. So yes, I think we have achieved a large number of objectives which we set out to do. And like Dr. Drabu mentioned, technology could have been better. And had that also worked, then it just could have been a wonderful, wonderful achievement. But having said that, please don't take away the fact that there are huge challenges leading to the bringing in itself of GST, which was a major achievement. And the functioning of the GST Council has again been a huge achievement. And I think we can really look at the GST Council replicating itself to handle all other areas of center state concerns.
6 on 10 and 7 on 10, that's pretty good going. But Haseeb, when we talk about the success or failure of GST, what really is a proper measure of success? Is it in terms of the revenue collections, formalization of the economy, ease of doing business, creation of a national market? How should we measure success or failure? Or for that matter, what is the right yardstick? Haseeb?
I would, of course, I would start off by looking at the macroeconomics of GST. I mean, what does it set out to do? I mean, the biggest thing for me in terms of GST has been the move towards formalization of the Indian economy, number one. Number two is the sustained structural thing on black economy. You have disincentivized cash transactions. May not be all cash transactions on black, but let me put it this way, apart from black economy, the reduction and minimalization of the cash economy. I think that's a huge thing, because what you have done is you have now reduced the incentive to do transactions in cash. Plus you have increased the ambit of knowing what exists in the informal economy. And these are huge. In fact, I remember talking about it in the council as well, that this is a change in the value system of doing business. And there obviously is bound to be opposition to this, there are bound to be glitches onto this. People who were getting into this, these activities certainly would not have wanted GST, but to my mind, revenue collection was never an issue. I mean, in terms of over the next 3 to 5 years, you would of course have issues with states, producer states not doing so well, but that's also turned out, what we had started off thinking, that maybe Maharashtra will lose and JK will benefit. But that's not happened, because the services taxation has compensated much more, and states like Maharashtra and others who are producer states haven't had the need to compensation in the, I think, after first 3 or 4 months. So revenue wise, there is no, I never thought it was going to be a big deal. Plus also, it's not often recognized that some of the gains from GST in terms of revenues will not come from indirect taxes, but from direct taxes. Internationally also, we have observed that the impact of a thing like GST is more on income tax as well, because then data starts talking to, the direct tax data talks to the indirect tax data, and you will see a much higher buoyancy in indirect taxes as a consequence of implementation of GST. So for me, the biggest thing in terms of measuring it is how well it gets taken at the retail level, in terms of the value systems of business, the formalization of the economy, the reduction in cash economy, and not so much the fiscal numbers. Going forward, those will become important, and how GST pans out now onwards. I think we have somewhere, I'd like to talk about that we lost some pace on that, is how the federal fiscal system adapts the GST regime to allow states greater flexibility in their fiscal management. I think that's where one would start looking at how successful this has been.
Okay, but that's pretty good news to start with, as I said earlier too. But Najib, so do you think that we will be able to meet the target? Najib?
I think going forward, tax administrations would have learned to adapt to this uniform law across the country. For the first time now, the states and the center were administrating a tax where decisions have to be uniform across the country, and that is a challenge. And I think we have adapted and fairly well in this first few months of learning. And secondly, administration ultimately is the key to the success of any policy. Going forward, that is going to be a challenge, and I'm happy that the center has taken upon itself the role of ensuring clarifications are issued for uniform implementation across the country. That I think is a significant development, because one was apprehensive initially that clarifications will start coming from various corners of the country, which will cause confusion. The sort of confusion we are seeing in the advanced rulings, which is completely avoidable, has not happened in terms of the broader policy. So yes, revenue with better compliance should improve. I think the center will be very concerned also about revenue, especially with a call for bringing in the petroleum products within the GST net, because that would mean a greater burden of compensation for the center to the various states. So I really think revenue is a matter of concern for the center, and they would be looking at it very, very closely in the days going forward.
Okay, Hasib, both you and Najib have fairly kind words to say about GST, but the fact is that the GST presently excludes large parts of the economy, the real estate sector, electricity, natural gas, alcohol, petrol. How hopeful are you of these being included, and how much does their exclusion take away from reaping the full benefits of GST? Since you can't claim input tax credit when you use any of these inputs, so how much does it take away from GST?
You know, it's very easy to kind of pick holes in the GST setup. But what I would suggest when anyone is assessing this is to see where we came from. One commodity, one product group. I remember leather industry, 17 rates in one state, 47 rates across the northern sector, maybe 200 rates across the country. From there to come to this point, I think has been a huge gain. Surely, I have never said that this is the perfect system. No, of course not. It's work in progress. To start with, there are far too many rates, and this was discussed and deliberated: 0, 5, 12, 18, 28, and then bullion rates are separate, some other rates are separate. So you're working with 10 rates effectively. Of course, they need to collapse this and bring it to one rate, but one rate would not be possible. I would think 3 rates, which is 0, and then a middle rate like 14.5, and then a top rate. And over time, given once your revenue issues kind of settle down, the system stabilizes, you can look at a rate of 12, 12.5. So it has to move in a certain manner. Yes, there were setbacks. Reverse charge mechanism was stopped for some time. Input tax credit issues with various sectors are rising. But I think these are work in progress, and I always believed that this will evolve over time. And given the diversity of the economy, the levels of engagement with taxation of different segments of the economy, you would kind of funnel it in over the next 3 to 5 years, if not 3 years. So we've done only a year, and I'll be pretty happy with it. And my only regret, honestly, is that the system would have been much, much better if the technology piece had been sorted. I think that's where a lot of kind of irritation and dissent and other things came in. Also, I think one is the paperwork, the administrative paperwork, initially what we started off with, monthly returns and all that, could have been thought through a little more. So when one looks at it, I think operationally lots and lots of issues still to be handled, was not handled in the best of way, but in terms of design and the willingness to go ahead with it at that point of time, to bring in the whole process of it to the parliament, state assemblies, was very, very good. And I think it will go to the credit that this was eventually done after 14, 15 years of deliberations. So let's not look at it in a comparative static manner that, okay, here is GST, how does it compare with various other things? No, let's look at it in a dynamic sense. And I think with every day there's an improvement. Hopefully in the next 3 to 5 months, the technology piece will be totally sorted. You will also see that the biggest thing is self-assessed, and people don't recognize that this country was known for many, many years about Inspector Raj and Tax Raj. Now you are doing self-assessment, and then the opening of books happens in a simulated manner in which, you know, risk and other things get factored in, makes it pretty neutral. And I think that's where the ease of doing business will come. You'll breathe a sigh of relief for the smaller guys who would be tax harassed. So I think it's a major change, and we now need to look at what are the next steps we take in the next 2 years to make it even better.
Oh, absolutely. Let's not belittle the kind of progress we've achieved so far. Where we are today is a far, far better place than where we were earlier. But I'm afraid it's time for us to slip into a very short break. But please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and I'm in discussion with two GST stalwarts, Hasib Drabu and Najib Shah, on the journey so far, what remains, how would we define the first year of GST? Najib, Hasib was talking about the multiplicity of rates. Is that something that we'll have to live with? How critical is it to have fewer rates?
Convergence of rates will happen. It will happen over a period of time. At the point when we brought in the GST, like is well known, we also had to ensure that whatever revenue was being got was achieved also in the GST regime. Hence the multiplicity of rates, and the sheer variety and the number of rates made it difficult for us to reduce the number of rates, 0, 5, 12, 18 and so on. So this convergence will happen. It will mean a lot of items from 5 going up. It will mean a lot of items from 28 coming down and 18 also coming down and meeting somewhere in between. That will take time, and that will happen, I believe, only when everybody is a little more secure about how the revenue itself will behave, because ultimately, while better compliance is expected to have an impact on revenue, it will also mean there has to be some sort of an ideal rate to ensure that we do get that sort of revenue. So multiplicity of rates is a factor currently, but it was something which we had to have at that point of time. And I think the convergence process has started, and it's a journey. It will take some time. It really will take some time.
Okay. Hasib, you spoke about revenues doing quite well, but the funny thing about GST really is that both the union and the state governments feel they've lost some part of their taxing power. What is the reality? In fact, one of the terms of the 15th Finance Commission is to examine whether the union has now been left with enough revenue. So which level of government has lost, or is this GST a very happy compromise and is win-win for all round?
Well, it's not really. I mean, I think the best way to describe is that you've pooled some of your tax sovereignties. But operationally speaking, I find this to be a much more egalitarian setup than earlier. Go back to 1991. I've said this earlier and I don't mind repeating it. The entire nature of economic regime in India was changed by a gentleman called Manmohan Singh. And I am sure the finance ministers of states woke up and read it in the Economic Times or the Business Standard next day, what had happened. Now, it is impossible. I can't think of a situation where the union government would make changes without consulting the state governments. I think this is where the GST Council has emerged as a very powerful federal institution, and I think it's India's first genuinely federal institution where states have a not just presence but a voice, and they can actually change the contours of policy. Look at what happened on the cess on sugar. I mean, for years and years and years, central government would charge duties, not electricity duty, and not so that it doesn't have to share revenues with the states. Now it was shot down by the states. So I think the way it has been handled, and I would also still have mentioned that the way it was conducted by the finance minister, where it's actually taking on board everybody. I think you've created a wonderful institution, and from a federal fiscal perspective, it's a genuine strengthening of the thing. And I for one, I've written about the terms of reference of the Finance Commission. I think they were terribly drafted, and there are some things which should not be there. And the fact that GST has been there should drive the entire terms of reference of the Finance Commission. They should see how to bring it into the ambit and start from there. So this is a good way to move from what I would have thought, what earlier was a bit of coercive federalism, to what you're now calling cooperative federalism, but perhaps even competitive federalism, whereby states compete with each other in a healthy sense to draft their fiscal policies and other macroeconomic policies. So coming to it, I mean, yes, I think centre has given up a bit. Some states also have given up powers, but they have pooled the sovereignties in the interest of creating a unified market, a greater good, and a consultative process. I think what states might have lost in changing rates and taking decisions on some of the taxations, they have gained by getting involved with the macroeconomic policy of the country, which is currently driven by fiscal policy. So the only place where states don't have a voice is the monetary policy. In public investment policy also states do have a voice, through whether it's through CSS or sharing or GATT formulas or whatever. Today you have a situation where you have made an entry into the fiscal policy. States will benefit from it, and I saw the functioning for 3 years of the GST Council. It was absolutely wonderful to see state finance ministers, articulating their view, because we have different interests. Interest groups are there, and different states are at different levels of development. How it all came together, and there are states like J&K and Goa worried about tourism. There are some states worried about craft, some about agriculture. So it all rounded up together to produce what I think is a good forum. And one shouldn't worry too much about the rate raising powers, which in any case under the VAT also had been done. You had bands, and also by and large most states adhere to that. So I don't see it as a loss of one or gain of the other. I see more as pooling of sovereignties, which has benefited the overall system.
Absolutely, and that's the only way forward in a country as diverse as ours. But Najib, if I can stick to operational issues with you, what were your biggest stumbling blocks when you started down the GST route? Was it the cumbersome forms, frequency of reporting, technology challenges, multiplicity of rates and slabs? And what are the stumbling blocks now, the biggest ones then and now? Najib?
Technological challenges were the biggest stumbling blocks. We really assumed that the IT processes would take care of all the business processes which we had in mind, and that was a belief which was obviously very, very wrong. And it is these technological challenges which unfortunately gave GST itself a bad name, and it took some time for the technological challenges to sort of stabilize, and that process is still going on. I believe when this the return process itself, which we thought when we had initially conceived was not so difficult, but obviously turned out to be very, very difficult for all concerned. The return process is in the process of getting simplified, so hopefully that will get sorted out. Now that the Council of Ministers is looking very, very closely at the technology, again, that oversight should have its positive impact. And once that gets sorted out, a major chunk of the concerns should get sorted out. Regarding multiplicity of rates, that is always going to be an issue. I think those are the calls that the GST Council, with in its wisdom and after 1 year of experience, would start taking slowly, because they would be looking at numbers. You can't wish away the fact that the numbers are going to be very, very important, and accordingly they'll make those convergence of rates. Regarding returns, again, like I mentioned, the multiplicity of returns are being reduced and simplified. So with technology also shaping up, that concern should get reduced. So I think operationally, these were issues at that point of time, and of course there are going to be clarifications sought. The GST Council has proved more than able to resolve and react with alacrity for all such concerns, and respond to these concerns through clarifications. So that has been happening, and that I think will happen for some more time, especially on the services sector, till things sort of settle down.
Okay. Hasib, if I could ask you for some inside information, as it were. In the discussions in the GST Council, did you find the BJP ruled states joining forces together with the union government, or do all the states tend to join forces against, as it were, the union government, quote unquote? Take, for instance, the case of petrol, where the union government is reportedly keen on getting it into GST, but the states are not. Do you see the BJP ruled states being more willing to fall in line with the other states, cooperative, competitive federalism, but is that all in inverted commas? Hasib?
No, in fact, I mean, I think my experience was rather, I mean, surprising that the GST Council was not divided, or let's say discussing issues on party lines. It was more on states, because I think, you know, and a good example are Maharashtra and Gujarat and other big states that, you know, though they were BJP ruled states, they never took positions which are out of line with what the sense of the House was. But you did, of course, have some, you know, the kind of discussions where some of these states would play to the gallery, you know, that kind of a thing. But I don't recollect a single instance. I think even during bullion matters, when it was being discussed, that, you know, states were divided on party lines and Congress opposing BJP. No, I didn't see that. They were far more kind of, you know, I think what binds the states together is that they are states first, and then they are, you know, run by various things. I think to a large extent also this is also a reflection of the fact that such policy matters are driven by the bureaucracy, and when the brief comes up to the minister, it's in a certain, you know, manner that gets reflected. So it's not so much, unless there are some headline grabbing items where there would probably be a diktat from the party high command to some of the states that you have to take a position here. But even there I found that off the table, that they were generally kind of, they would tell us that, you know, while we were sitting at lunch, there was something that, well, this is something I had to say, but I generally think what we're doing is right. So, plus also, I think I said this earlier also, the way it has been conducted by the finance minister, Mr. Jaitley, that time, tremendous patience to listen and kind of build confidence of states, like small states like Manipur, JK and all have had enough to hear their voice. So that's where I think it is, it's important to see how the GST Council has emerged, and it will evolve further. But it's got into its DNA now, that it's a federal institution. I think that's important. That's a big, big gain.
Okay, that's very heartening to hear in a country where even the most mundane things get politicized out of all order completely. But we're running out of time, so let me end by asking both of you that if you were to now single out which is the biggest challenge that we have at the moment, what would that be? Let me start with you, Najib.
I think technology, because really if that starts functioning in the manner in which it ought to, GST would be a wonderful step forward towards ensuring better compliance, increase in revenue, and lesser evasion.
Would you agree with him, Hasib, that technology really is the biggest stumbling block, and if we have that sorted out, we've got everything sorted out? Hasib?
I mean, yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that technology is a single piece, but now that he has said and we have talked about technology, I also like to say two more things. One, communication. I think people, you need to communicate, because the general sense in the civil society is that it's inflationary, it's adding to whatever, that needs to be communicated. Second is, don't stop thinking now. I mean, start addressing issues, because the biggest issue today you have is the tourism trade. Start doing things like, tourist refunds and other things, so that those voices are in some ways addressed. So three things: technology, communication, and keep adding to stuff so that your stakeholdership increases and it becomes profitable for everybody. Because today we find a lot of people making a lot of noises which can be addressed very easily.
Okay, so that's not a very difficult thing, just three things. It should be possible to tackle it in the next year, but I'm afraid we've run out of time completely. So I'll have to end this absolutely fascinating discussion now, even though we haven't been able to touch upon so many things I'd like to have touched upon. But to be honest, it's impossible to do justice to a subject like GST in the limited time that we have at our disposal. But I do hope that we managed to give our viewers a sense of the key milestones of the journey so far and the challenges that remain. Thank you so much, Hasib and Najib, for joining me in the discussion. Thank you also for watching. Remember, we'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. Till then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at TT Now.